Contohnya di rumah, aku memasang teknologi panel surya yang mengubah energi matahari menjadi listrik sehingga mengurangi beban listrik di ini yang energinya akibat pupuk kimia. Kegiatan lain yang aku lakukan adalah dengan menanam pohon di pekarangan rumah. Menanam pohon merupakan investasi jangka panjang yang bertujuan untuk meningkatkan kualitas udara. Melalui proses fotosintesis, pohon menyerap karbon dan melepaskan oksigen kembali ke udara. Hal tersebut adalah salah satu tindakan untuk memerangi perubahan iklim. Pupuk yang aku gunakan di sini adalah pupuk kompos yang terbuat dari sisa makanan, sayuran, buah-buahan, dan daun kering yang kemudian ditambahkan larutan dengan kandungan bakteri Lactobacillus untuk mempercepat proses pengomposan. Untuk menghemat BBM, aku menggunakan sebuah perangkat yang bernama generator HHU. Generator ini merupakan teknologi yang memanfaatkan proses elektrolisis air menjadi gas HHU. Gas HO berfungsi sebagai bahan bakar tambahan di samping BBM sebagai bahan bakar utama. Teman-teman, masih banyak lagi langkah-langkah kecil yang bisa kita ambil untuk selamatkan bumi kita. Kita hanya butuh niat dan tekad yang kuat serta konsistensi. Semua itu bersumber dari diri kita sendiri. Kapan kita mau bergerak demi lingkungan yang lebih baik, atau hanya berdiam diri tanpa ada makna yang berarti.
Tanpa kita sadari, banyak kebiasaan kita sehari-hari yang menghasilkan banyak gas emisi dan bikin bumi tidak sehat lagi. Maka dari itu, ini dia langkah kecil yang bisa kamu lakukan untuk bikin bumi happy lagi. Pertama, bawa botol minum sendiri. Kedua, kurangi frekuensi penggunaan kendaraan pribadi dengan rajin berjalan kaki dan berolahraga setiap hari. Ketiga, pilih makanan dan minuman hasil produk dalam negeri. Hal ini bisa mengurangi emisi CO2 yang dihasilkan dari barang impor loh. Jangan lupa juga untuk perbanyak makan sayur dan kurangi konsumsi daging. Perhatikan juga penggunaan air sehari-hari. Ingat ya untuk selalu hemat air. Selanjutnya, membaca buku fisik untuk mengurangi screen time di HP kamu. Terakhir, gunakan teknologi dengan efektif. Tentunya, jangan lupa untuk mencabut stop kontak jika tidak terpakai. Hal-hal kecil tersebut bisa kita lakukan bersama-sama dan menghasilkan dampak luar biasa loh. Yuk kita bekerja sama dan percaya, karena masih banyak jalan menuju net zero.
Sampah plastik selalu menjadi ancaman bagi kehidupan. Dibutuhkan waktu sekitar 400 tahun bahkan lebih untuk dapat mengurainya. Ancaman lain, meningkatnya jumlah emisi gas rumah kaca di atmosfer menyebabkan memanasnya suhu bumi. Dampaknya, tentu saja, mencairnya es pada kutub yang menyebabkan bertambah tingginya permukaan air laut. Bahkan, jika hal ini dibiarkan, diprediksi sebagian Jakarta dapat tenggelam pada 2050 dan lebih buruk pada 2100. Seperti halnya tubuh kita, bumi juga harus dirawat loh. Berikut ada 3 tips merawat bumi versiku. Yang pertama, kurangi penggunaan sampah plastik. Membuang sampah pada tempatnya sudah menjadi kewajiban bagi kita semua. Namun akan lebih baik apabila kita mengurangi penggunaan plastik tersebut. Gunakanlah tas belanja dan botol air minum yang bisa digunakan berulang-ulang. Yang kedua, hemat listrik dan air. Kalian tahu nggak kalau pemenuhan energi listrik Indonesia sebagian besar menggunakan energi fosil, terutama pembakaran batu bara yang mencemari udara. Pendistribusian air ke konsumen memerlukan banyak sekali energi listrik. Dengan menghemat air dan mematikan peralatan listrik yang sedang tidak digunakan, secara tidak langsung kita telah mengurangi penggunaan energi fosil pembangkit. Yang ketiga, kurangi penggunaan kendaraan bermotor. Kendaraan bermotor adalah penyumbang karbon terbesar di Indonesia. Penggunaan transportasi umum adalah pilihan yang tepat. Bahkan dapat mengurangi kemacetan loh. Namun akan lebih baik bila kita berjalan kaki. Atau naik sepeda lebih sehat. Atau kalau ada dana lebih nih ya, beralih ke kendaraan listrik. Semoga video ini dapat bermanfaat bagi banyak orang. Gue Gilang Ramadan. Thanks for watching. See you. Jagalah bumi, jangan kau sesali. Jagalah bumi untuk hidup ini.
Beberapa tahun terakhir, musim sudah tidak menentu. Di daerah-daerah, banjir melanda, kemarau berkepanjangan. Akhir-akhir ini, suhu bumi semakin meningkat. Bukti apa lagi yang kita butuh agar kita sadar perubahan iklim sedang terjadi. Negara-negara lain sedang berlomba untuk beralih menggunakan energi bersih. Sementara kita masih menggunakan batu bara dan bahan bakar fosil lainnya sebagai sumber energi utama. Yang sisa pembakarannya penyumbang emisi terbesar, penyebab perubahan iklim. Bukankah sudah cukup kita tersiksa bernafas karena harus memakai masker? Atau kita harus memakai tabung oksigen? Lalu, akankah kita terus seperti ini ke depannya? Akankah kita abai terhadap masa depan generasi selanjutnya? Sebagai anak muda, kita selalu bisa berbuat sesuatu agar bumi tetap lestari dan terhindar dari perubahan iklim. Gue sendiri memilih untuk bekerja di bidang energi terbarukan sebagai bentuk sumbangsi kecil gue untuk menyelamatkan bumi dari perubahan iklim. That is my action. What's yours? Choose your passion for fighting the climate change, together for our future. I'm Regif, Indonesia for climate action.
I always thought that farmers are cool, but you know what even cooler? It's organic farmer. So let's go to the far side of Tangerang and visit a little farm and the farmers who practice organic farming and see what it is and what's the impact of the environment itself. Organic farming is now starting to be widely known by the public along with the trend of healthy living. Many organic farmers have sprung up along with an increasingly open market share. Not only because of its high economic value, organic farming is important for repairing agricultural ecosystems that are increasingly damaged by exposure to synthetic or chemical substances such as pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Therefore, it is important to know the concept of organic agriculture due to many misconceptions out there. To seek the answer, I traveled to Tiga Raksa Tangerang and met a farmer who practices organic farming. This is where I found the figure of Ali Imran. In his small farm, he educates and inspires people about environmentally friendly agriculture, and I met him while he was plowing his land. So let's ask him, what is the concept of organic farming?
Organik ini ialah kita bisa disebut menghidupkan alam ya, back to nature kalau bahasa kerennya ya. Kemudian kita mengembalikan unsur hara tanah dan harus bisa memaksimalkan hasil-hasil olahan-olahan rumah tangga, misalkan hasil olahan produk-produk yang tidak terpakai, misalkan dari limbah dapur, kemudian dari limbah pasar, kita bisa digunakan sebagai pupuk organik cairnya.
Giving back to nature, as he says, is a key element of organic farming. This farming method can even use the organic waste that we produce every day. However, this noble initiative is not without its challenges. It is increasingly difficult to attract young people to engage in agriculture.
Yang paling mendasar itu dari SDM, karena tenaga pertanian, apalagi di kalangan pemuda memang agak sulit.
And yet, he remains full of hope.
Harapan saya dari awal bertani, sebetulnya pertanian ini jangan sampai punah, apalagi pertanian organik. Ini sangat besar untuk kita majukan karena kehidupan sehari-hari kita ialah dari pertanian.
From this little organic farmland lies a big hope for better environment, for better food. Organic farming is a key to sustainable agriculture. It's an agriculture for the future.
Wisatawan tersebut akan bisa melihat langsung perkembangan pohonnya melalui aplikasi tersebut dan juga bisa melihat pohon-pohon tanaman orang lain di sekitar pohon yang ditanamnya.
Have you ever wondered about how many trash that they create in just a day? We have ingrained a fast-track lifestyle in our daily lives.
However, this is the place where each garbage is sorted and recycled, not by machine, but by humans.
Sehingga ada beberapa sampah yang bisa disetor ke bank sampah sebagai tabungan, seperti sampah organik. Tiap rumah tangga itu pasti setiap hari memproduksi sampah organik.
Maka dari itu, ini dia langkah kecil yang bisa kamu lakukan untuk bikin bumi happy lagi. Pertama, bawa botol minum sendiri.
But I hope this step will grow bigger every day, because I believe many roads lead to net zero, right?
Naik sepeda itu menurut saya bisa menghindari macet dan juga nggak menambah polusi udara di kota.
Several impacts that could affect wildlife and also us, humans. It could damage carbon-sink ecosystem such as mangroves, seagrass beds, and coral reefs.
Seorang mengeluarkan karbon dioksida dan jika dikali 7,8 miliar orang, emisi karbon napas manusia berkontribusi terhadap 5,8% volume emisi karbon tahunan. Apakah kita harus berhenti bernapas?
Bagi bumi kita tercinta ini. Contohnya di rumah, aku memasang teknologi panel surya yang mengubah energi matahari menjadi listrik.
What does sustainable fashion mean? Well, it is a movement of fostering change to fashion products and the fashion system towards greater ecological integrity and social justice.
Gue sendiri memilih untuk bekerja di bidang energi terbarukan sebagai bentuk sumbangsi kecil gue.
Memilih dan memilah sampah dari rumah supaya tidak diharapkan makin banyak timbunan sampah di TPA.
Once every few months, I take them out, put them into the soil, and slowly they turn into compost. And now our garden grows way better.
I usually wake up with my AC off because I have my timer on. I think it's great because less electricity generated, less money spent, and no more procrastination in bed.
Sedangkan sampah non-organik diangkut pada hari Selasa oleh petugas sampah dari Desa Taro.
Saya akan memanfaatkan lahan ini untuk menanam agar tidak ada lagi masyarakat yang membuang sampah nih di dalam pali tersebut.
Menyebabkan memanasnya suhu bumi. Dampaknya tentu saja bencana es pada kutub yang menyebabkan bertambah tingginya permukaan air laut.
Organic farming is now starting to be widely known by the public along with the trend of healthy living. Many organic farmers have sprung up along with an increasingly open market share.
Good day to you, and I'm truly sorry that I can't be with you in person. There is one subject which is going to affect every single one of us, and that is, of course, climate change. I grew up in Britain. As a boy, I yearned to see the glories of the tropical world, the mysteries of the rainforest, the jungle, the unbelievable beauties of a coral reef, nature at its most complex and glorious. And nowhere are these beauties and wonders more evident than here in Southeast Asia. The Coral Triangle, the global center of marine diversity, and the rainforest, which is the oldest in the world, dating back to 70 million years. And when I got here, I was not disappointed. I came here nearly 70 years ago, and these wonderlands were exactly like that. But since that time, they've changed. They have been dreadfully damaged, and I have seen it happening. Borneo has lost its rainforest at a faster rate than anywhere else in the world. 30% of it has gone within the last 40 years. Thailand and Vietnam, over a similar period, have lost half their mangroves, and in consequence their coasts and the cities built on them are losing their protection against tidal waves and storms. But the natural world is a source of more than just beauty. It provides us with every mouthful of food we eat and every lungful of air we breathe. Our health and our survival is dependent upon it. And yet we continue to destroy it. That is sheer folly. But these losses are not irreversible, not yet. Nature can recover if given the chance. Mangroves can be replanted. The rainforest can spread back into areas where it once flourished. Coral reefs will regrow if allowed to do so, and with a speed that will astonish anyone who's not familiar with the underwater world. And cities themselves, the home for so many of us, can welcome back wildlife and help it flourish, as Singapore, the city of nature, is now demonstrating so dramatically. Rainforests can still help to regulate world temperatures. Urban green spaces can help cool our cities and reduce the risk of floods. ASEAN has played a central role in this recovery and must surely continue to do so with even greater determination and vigour. It's within your power to do even better Humanity working together could, even now, stabilize the global rise in temperature to below 2 degrees, and so avert a major worldwide catastrophe. I'm truly delighted that the UK, as president of COP26 in partnership with Italy, is calling for urgent action to put the protection of nature and diversity at the very centre of climate policies. As we come out of COVID-19 pandemic, we must surely strengthen these efforts and build back and build greener. All of us, no matter who we are, have the responsibility to care for the planet. The future of all humanity now depends on us. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you every success.
Selamat pagi, selamat siang Bapak Ibu sekalian yang hadir di Zoom dan selamat datang di media briefing untuk COP26 menjelang pembukaan konferensi perubahan iklim terbesar COP26 di Glasgow 1-12 November 2021. Izinkan kami untuk memberikan paparan singkat mengenai bagaimana penggunaan fitur interpretation atau penerjemahan secara simultan di dalam Zoom kali ini. Dalam slide berikutnya, ada beberapa hal yang Bapak Ibu mohon dapat perhatikan dalam mengikuti kegiatan pagi hari ini. Dan yang paling penting dalam rangka untuk mengaktifasi dan memastikan bahwa fitur interpretation atau penerjemahan berjalan dengan baik, kami berharap Bapak Ibu sudah mengunduh dan menggunakan Zoom versi terkini. Selanjutnya, bila Bapak Ibu mengakses webinar pada pagi hari ini menggunakan laptop ataupun komputer, dalam slide berikutnya sudah terlihat bagaimana cara menggunakan fitur interpretation. Di kanan bawah layar sudah ada icon bola dunia, mohon diklik dan dapat dipilih bahasa yang Bapak Ibu ingin dengarkan. Bila nanti pembicara berbicara dalam bahasa Inggris, maka penerjemahan secara simultan akan tersedia secara langsung di channel Indonesia. Jadi mohon diklik dan dipilih channel Indonesia. Dan kami juga menyarankan Bapak Ibu untuk tidak perlu memute original audio. Kemudian dalam slide berikutnya, bila Bapak Ibu mengakses pertemuan ini menggunakan handphone, penerjemahan juga tersedia. Di kanan bawah layar sudah ada 3 titik. Mohon diklik dan dipilih language interpretation. Dan kemudian dapat dipilih bahasa yang ingin didengarkan. Kami ulangi sekali lagi, bila pembicara nanti berbicara dalam bahasa Inggris, maka penerjemahan secara simultan tersedia dalam bahasa Indonesia. Setelah dipilih bahasa yang ingin didengarkan, mohon tidak memute original audio dan terakhir klik done di kanan atas layar untuk mengaktifasi layanan. Berikutnya Bapak Ibu, kami juga ingin menginformasikan selama berlangsungnya media briefing ini, kami meminta Bapak Ibu untuk dapat menggunakan fitur Q&A atau box Q&A di kanan bawah layar untuk menanyakan pertanyaan. Jadi setiap pertanyaan mohon diajukan di layar di box Q&A untuk para jurnalis, dan kami juga mengingatkan untuk para jurnalis dapat menggunakan format yang dapat ditemukan di chat box. Jadi Bapak Ibu dapat melihat informasi selanjutnya di dalam chat box. Dan guna memastikan kelancaran pertemuan hari ini, host dan co-host mungkin dapat memute audio atau menstop video para panelis yang tidak sedang berbicara bila mereka tanpa sengaja menyebabkan gangguan terhadap acara. Ini dilakukan untuk menjamin suara pembicara dan juru bahasa tetap jelas. Terima kasih atas kerjasama Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, dan kami juga sudah mencantumkan WhatsApp yang dapat dihubungi bila ada kendala dalam penggunaan fitur-fitur Zoom. Demikian, terima kasih and have a productive webinar.
Actually inform the public about the importance of this issue, the importance of climate change, and before we proceed, I would like to welcome our media friends who are joining us via Zoom. Selamat siang rekan-rekan media yang bergabung dengan kami melalui online. Teman-teman media dari Riau, Surabaya, Bandung, Papua, Aceh, dan juga Bali, dan juga ada beberapa wilayah lainnya yang tidak bisa saya sebutkan. Translation service untuk bahasa Indonesia tersedia bagi teman-teman yang mengikuti acara ini secara daring. Right, so we're just a few days away to the opening of the UNFCCC Climate Change Summit in Glasgow. This is a very important issue. The attention of the world will be upon UK. So we are here to share you updates about the work that the UK has been doing, the collaborations, the commitment, and then the steps that we want to take in regards to setting a more ambitious goal for COP26 and how do we want to work with the Indonesian government. So I'm gonna leave it there, I'm gonna stop there, I'm gonna leave it to the experts. I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Bapak Duta Besar Inggris untuk Indonesia dan Timor Leste, Bapak Owen Jenkins. Selamat datang Pak Owen. And then our second speaker is Ibu Helen Faulkner, our first Secretary for Climate Change and Low Carbon Development. And then Ibu Amanda McLaughlin, our Development Director, who will be speaking about the low carbon energy. And last but not least, Bapak Tiago, our Senior Forestry Governance and Market Advisor. So the format of the media briefing will be we'll be hearing the presentations from all the speakers, and then after that we will allocate a session for Q&A. So I would like to welcome Bapak Dubes untuk share presentasinya Pak dengan kita semua. Silakan Pak.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Ya, siap. Selamat siang dan selamat datang ke acara penting ini. Indonesia, saya belum cukup lancar untuk acara ini. So welcome and thank you for attending, whether you're here in person or virtually via Zoom at this important event today. As Mbak Faye has already said, this is our first press briefing in person for 20 months, and it's right that we're doing it for such an important topic. And I'm delighted to be here today with some key members from my British Embassy team. Everybody is working on climate change in the Embassy, but the three people behind me on the stage here are right at the heart of the work that we're doing in preparation for COP26. And in 3 days' time, COP26 will be upon us after 2 years of preparation. This is the next big international conference to take action on climate change. It will be a critical moment in determining whether the world community has the political will to take action on the biggest challenge which we face as a global community. And as Mbakwe has mentioned, you, as the media, as the press representatives, have an absolutely critical role, a crucially important role over the next few weeks. The goal of today's event is to make sure that you feel informed, to make sure that you feel confident about the information that you have and the issue of climate change. It's to make sure that you have the background that you need to educate and to engage the Indonesian public about climate change and about COP26. We do want to give you the space to hear from us and to ask whatever questions you would like to help shape the reporting and the information which you will be contributing over the next few weeks. We do want you to write articles after this briefing, so please do use what we say. Everything that we say will be on the record unless we say specifically otherwise. I'm not intending to do so. Because we do want the message to be out there. And you as the press, you know how important you are. An educated, informed public is the bedrock of democracy. Only if the public is well informed and aware can they hold politicians and others in positions of power to high standards. And that means better debate. It means better politics and better governance. And that means we will be better at tackling the collective challenges which all of us face together. And in few areas is change as badly needed as it is on climate change. Climate change is the biggest threat that we face as a world community, whether we are in the United Kingdom or in Indonesia. Indonesia is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like so many other countries. Those threats include rising sea levels, changing rainfall patterns. Those rainfall events will raise the risk of flooding. There will be impacts on crop yields from increased temperature and less predictable rainfall. And there will be damage to the maritime environment, to coral reefs and marine ecosystems from rising sea temperatures. But there are also benefits to taking action on climate change. 800,000 people die annually around the world because of air pollution, which is made worse by burning coal and driving petrol and diesel vehicles. The transition to renewable energy can help with that. The first thing I'd like to say is that climate change is real. Right now, we have a world with an average temperature rise of at least 1.1 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. That doesn't sound like a lot, but our world and its environment are very finely balanced. And as the temperature rises, there is a risk of sudden and dramatic changes and disaster if certain changes in the natural world happen. And a global average hides much more extreme rises in different places in the world. We're already seeing impacts in many countries and regions, such as more frequent and more extreme weather events, heat waves, wildfires. Last year, Asia experienced its hottest year on record, 1.4 degrees above the average temperature for the previous 3 decades. And that temperature rise caused billions of dollars in economic damage from extreme weather and climate change impacts. And scientists are in no doubt that this will just get worse. There is one global effort to tackle climate change. It's in the framework of our shared multilateral institutions. It's in the framework of the United Nations. And it is the United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as the COP process. Now, this started back in 1992 with the signing of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And every year since 1994, a Conference of the Parties happens. Now, a Conference of the Parties is just a fancy way of saying that all the countries who have signed the convention get together to talk about climate change and how we will tackle it. And so COP26 is just the 26th time that these countries have got together. Ellen will talk a bit more about this when she comes to the podium. But it was at the last big COP in Paris in 2015, at which 189 countries agreed that the consequences of global temperature rises are so devastating that we really must try to keep global average temperature rises within 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, 1.5 degrees centigrade wasn't chosen because that's a good outcome. We will have worse climate disasters, worse weather effects now if we reach 1.5 degrees. But it was chosen because it remains the best available, the least bad scenario that is still in reach. But unfortunately, on current trajectories, it looks as if we will go above 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. At the moment, we're heading for between at least 1.5 and 2.7 degrees average global temperature rise this century, unless significant and immediate emissions reductions occur. So the goal that we as a world community set together at the Paris Agreement is only just within reach. And that's why, for the last 2 years, the United Kingdom has been leading a big push as the chair of the next big COP, COP26, to try to make the Paris Agreement goal happen. So, what does that mean? What do we need to deliver the above and to successfully fight climate change? Number one, we need ambitious commitments from all countries. Every country must urgently come forward with ambitious emissions reductions commitments. Both mid-century net zero targets that commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by the middle of the century, and 2030 nationally determined contributions, which are nearer-term emissions reductions targets that align with the net zero goal. Number two, we need action to deliver on those commitments. The world doesn't need words. The world needs all countries to commit to action in 4 areas which are critical to keeping 1.5 degrees alive as a goal. That includes quickly phasing out the use of coal, making transport zero emissions, ending deforestation, and delivering on the promises of finance to support a global transition and to help countries to adapt to climate change impacts that are already inevitable. Number 3, we need a negotiated outcome that puts in place a system that will accelerate progress through to 2030. That requires finalizing the Paris rulebook, including Article 6 on carbon trading, which will help the world reduce emissions at the lowest possible cost. Resolving the issues of transparency and common time frames for nationally determined contributions will be an important part of the agreement, as will closing the gap that remains between the goals of the Paris Agreement and the countries and all countries' 2030 NDCs. And the fourth area is progress on adaptation to the effects of our changing climate, to account for the loss and damage that it can cause, and critically, to secure enough money from both public and private finance to tackle. This must be agreed at COP26. And we, as a developed country, know that this must include meeting the goal that we've set ourselves of $100 billion a year of climate finance. This is money to support climate action in developing countries. And we know that meeting that goal is a matter of trust. My Prime Minister, Mr. Boris Johnson, has said that we need action on coal, cars, cash, and trees. On coal, we are asking countries and supporting countries to invest in clean energy and to phase out coal for the developed world by 2030 and for the developing world by 2040. The UK itself has committed to end coal power by 2024 at the latest. On cars, we are asking countries to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles and to abandon polluting vehicles by 2035 at the latest. The UK has committed to end the sale of polluting cars by 2030. On cash, as I've said, developed nations need to deliver on their commitment to mobilize at least $100 billion a year in climate finance for developing countries. The UK has committed to £11.6 billion in international climate finance over the next 5 years. And global frameworks also need to be set in place to get trillions in private finance flowing, which will be the real engine of the climate transition that we need to see. And on trees, we are calling for action to restore habitats and nature and halt deforestation by 2030. The UK itself is committed to trebling tree planting rates by the end of May 2024. So, in all, we need rapid and immediate cuts in emissions, and we need net zero to be achieved by mid-century or sooner. To meet these goals, all countries around the world need to work together, and each has a contribution to make. We cannot fight climate change if only one set of countries, whether that's developed countries or others, act. And indeed, there is now no trade-off between climate action and economics. We know that green growth achieves the highest, most inclusive, and most sustained economic growth. And that's because the era of clean, cheap, and reliable renewable energy is here. Indonesia has absolutely extraordinary renewable energy potential. Its potential is at least 6 times the current total energy demand here. And this is why the President-designate of COP26, Mr. Alok Sharma, has called Indonesia a potential climate superpower. We've seen in the Low Carbon Development Initiative report, which Bappenas produced back in 2019, that making the most of the clean growth potential will deliver an average of 6% growth in Indonesia, which is higher than the high carbon alternatives. higher than if Indonesia does not take climate action. And that was in 2019. Ever since that report was published, the cost of renewable energy has been falling rapidly. Globally, the power sector accounts for about a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. We need to move away from coal-fired power and towards renewable energy. And according to reports, that needs to happen about 5 times faster than at present across the world. The good news is that solar power is now cheaper than new coal and gas plants in over 2/3 of the countries of the world. And where it isn't, it's often due to subsidies for fossil fuels or not counting the true costs of burning fossil fuels. And for this reason, investors are demanding significantly higher returns, up to 4 times the return for coal than for wind and solar, due to the risks of investments in coal. Let me turn briefly to Indonesia. I think we all know that Indonesia, as a potential climate superpower, is critical for climate action because of its size, because it's holding the G20 presidency next year, and because of its extraordinary natural resources, its forests, which are vital for millions of livelihoods and for absorbing greenhouse gas emissions, and for fossil fuels. Indonesia has abundant renewable resources, and let me pay tribute now to the high ambition which we are seeing from the government of Indonesia, and particularly the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, as well as elsewhere in government, to make the most of those resources. And I'd also like to express my high appreciation to the Indonesian government for its progress and the ambition that it's showed in reducing emissions, particularly in the forestry and land use sector, where goals include an ambitious target of making that sector a net carbon sink by 2030, as well as an all-sector target for emissions to peak in 2030, with net zero by 2060 or sooner. We very much welcome this high ambition which Indonesia has set itself and are committed to supporting it in taking this work forward. And we also welcome Indonesia's openness to considering higher ambition, perhaps towards net zero 2050 and earlier coal phase out, if there is sufficient support from developed countries. I encourage Indonesia to be as ambitious as possible at this COP. We need all countries, including Indonesia, to do so in order to save our planet. Working together on climate change and low carbon development will remain a key part of our relationship with Indonesia in the coming years. And I'm confident that Indonesia will continue to demonstrate the leadership that it is already showing in this area, and that we will see further successes as a result of Indonesia's leadership and of the UK-Indonesia partnership. So as I come to my closing, let me say please do report on COP26 as much as you can over the next few weeks. Write about why we need to act. Write about what needs to be done. Write about the solutions which already exist to the challenge of climate change. And write about the countries, whether that's the UK or Indonesia, which are showing the way as to how we do this. Climate change can feel like an impossible challenge, but it is not. Between 1990 and 2019, the United Kingdom reduced our total greenhouse gas emissions by 44%, while growing our economy by 78%. In 2012, about 40% of Britain's electricity came from coal. That figure is now below 2% just in 9 years. And we will have completely phased out coal power by 2024, as I said earlier. Rapid change is possible. We have the technology, and the economics is strongly in favor of change. And climate change can feel like a difficult issue to understand, but it's not really. It's something which is quite straightforward. We need to solve it. We need to find a way to live in a better balance with nature. We need nature, not just for our well-being, as the pandemic has shown, but actually because we humans depend entirely on nature. Without it, we can't survive. So we need, once more, to start taking nature into account. And sometimes climate change can feel beyond us as individuals. It can leave us feeling powerless and like we can't make a difference. But actually, there's a lot we can do as individuals to make a difference. Small actions add up. And at the same time, we can press our politicians, our powerful and influential business owners, and corporate leaders to act with an eye on the future and to think about how history will judge them if, as Pope Francis and a range of religious leaders said, we inherit a garden and leave a wasteland to our children. We know the science. We know that a better future is possible. We can act. And now the moment is to do the right thing before it's too late and be remembered as the generation that saved the planet for our own good and for the generations that will come. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih Pak Dubes. Bisa saya ambil garis besarnya dari pidato yang disampaikan oleh Pak Dubes tadi bahwa isu perubahan iklim itu adalah isu yang nyata dan sejumlah negara telah mengalami serangkaian dampak dari perubahan iklim, mulai dari perubahan cuaca ekstrim, gelombang panas, kebakaran hutan, serta hal-hal yang berdampak merusak lainnya. Dan ini semua sudah terjadi dan kita semua memiliki tanggung jawab untuk memastikan hal ini tidak terjadi lagi. Dan oleh karena itu kita semua negara harus meneguhkan komitmen untuk menjaga kenaikan temperatur global rata-rata hingga 1,5 derajat Celcius. Dan Pak Dubes tadi mengatakan bahwa dunia tidak butuh kata-kata, dunia butuh aksi nyata. Dan COP26 adalah momentum penting, momentum yang sangat kritikal bagi seluruh negara untuk mengambil tindakan nyata. Karena hanya dengan kerjasama dan komitmen yang teguh, kita semua bisa bekerja sama mengatasi dampak dari perubahan iklim. Tadi Pak Dubes juga menyatakan apresiasi tertingginya kepada pemerintah Indonesia, terutama rekan-rekan kami di KLHK, karena dari pemerintah Indonesia sudah menunjukkan progres yang amat sangat positif, terutama di sektor kehutanan dan penggunaan lahan, dan juga komitmen net carbon sink pada 2030. Dan Pak Dubes tadi mengencourage semua negara dan termasuk Indonesia untuk sama-sama meneguhkan komitmen, bekerja sama menciptakan planet yang lebih baik untuk generasi mendatang. Begitu ya Pak ya. Oke, baik. Dan saya sekarang I would like to welcome Ibu Helen Faulkner, our First Secretary for Climate Change, to deliver her presentation. Helen, silakan.
Thank you, Mbak Faye, and thank you to everyone who's here today, both in the room and virtually, showing interest in this really critical topic. And thank you, Pak Dubes, for those opening remarks. As Mbak Faye said, I'm Helen Faulkner. I'm the First Secretary for Climate Change Policy at the British Embassy in Jakarta, and I am also our COP26 lead. So for 2 years, COP26 has been my life. That has been both a challenge but also an extraordinary privilege in a country like Indonesia with so much potential for leadership in this area. I want to explain today a little bit about what COP26 is, why it's important, our role as president, which we're delighted to be carrying out in partnership with Italy this year, and to try to give a sense of what COP26 will look like from the outside, especially for you as journalists trying to find those really critical stories to tell. So as Pak Dubes mentioned in his remarks, COP is part of the United Nations. It sits under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, now usually referred to as the UNFCCC. And the reason that that's important is because as part of the United Nations, the convention is open to all parties who are members of the United Nations, and 197 countries have signed up to that convention. And the other key factor is that decisions of the convention are made by consensus. There's no voting, no one's voice is stronger than anyone else's, everyone has to agree. Sometimes that is a very challenging aspect, but it also means that the Framework Convention has this sense of inclusivity and balance, and I think that's really important. I want to talk a little bit about the Paris Agreement of 2015 and why this is so important, and why when we talk about COP26 we often refer back to Paris. I mean, Paris includes some elements that previous agreements have had, around increasing efforts for adaptation, around finance, but it also has this crucial commitment to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and to aim for 1.5 degrees. And that commitment is set out in national plans known as nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, which have targets to 2030. But I think the real reason that Paris is so important, apart from that critical inclusion of 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, is that it brings every country, every party to the convention together in a common cause. And that's the first time we've had an agreement where countries have agreed every country has a responsibility, every country needs to take action. And it's now 192 countries have ratified the Paris Agreement. I think it is still the biggest international treaty that exists. And so it captures that recognition that climate change is a threat to every country in the world, and so every country needs to be part of the decision-making on global efforts to address climate change. So COP26, there have been 5 COPs since Paris. Why is this one so important? Obviously for us as presidents it's incredibly important, but there's a reason why we bid to have the presidency of COP26. So 5 years after Paris, it's the first COP where we need and expect to see the aims of the agreement being put into real-world action. It's the first COP where countries have to report and update on those national emissions reduction targets that they made before Paris, their nationally determined contributions. So 5 years now since Paris, do those collective updated agreement, how far are we from holding global temperature increase to 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees? Because every year that passes, the science is more and more alarming and the impacts are more and more clear. So we know that with every year that passes, 2 degrees is probably too far. We need to make every effort we possibly can to keep 1.5 degrees in reach. So it will help us to identify how far are we from reaching those goals, and what further action do we need to take with urgency to try and fulfill that commitment. As Pac Duba said, our presidency, our central role of the presidency is to reach a negotiated outcome. So that negotiated outcome, the technical negotiations on the details of the decisions that will come out of COP, that remains our key role, and we're very conscious of that. And although a lot of the public information that goes out is about other aspects, we do have a really big team from the UK whose sole purpose it is to make sure that those negotiations reach a negotiated outcome. We're very keen that is a transparent and inclusive process, and so what comes out at the end is a set of decisions in which all countries feel that their voices have been heard and that their views have been represented. And that's one of the reasons that we decided, even with all of the challenges it presents, that COP26 needed to be an in-person conference, because doing this virtually or in a hybrid doesn't allow that inclusion of every country. You've got challenges of time zones, connectivity. So even though it's been incredibly complicated to arrange that, and incredibly complicated actually for countries to work out how they can attend, doing it in person we felt was really crucial to making sure we are giving that inclusivity. So that's the central point in negotiations, but we also have a role in diplomacy, so working with every country through the negotiations, but also in our ongoing relationships to try and push for that increased ambition in emissions reductions, but also in adaptation and in finance. And this diplomatic effort is a key part of our presidency. And I think we have made some progress, actually significant amounts of progress. 2 years ago, I would not have said that we would be where we are now. 70% of the world's economy is now committed to reaching net zero emissions. That number is increasing even as we speak. So every day we're getting new reports of the latest country to say, yes, we want to sign up, we want to reach net zero. And a significant proportion of those commitments are to reach net zero by 2050 or earlier. As chair of the G7 this year, the UK has also spearheaded efforts to encourage G7 members to really step up and show their leadership on climate. So we now have all G7 members committed to reach net zero by 2050 or sooner, and all have 2030 targets, so those earlier targets in the nationally determined contributions that puts them on a pathway to be able to achieve net zero by 2050. I think we would all recognise that the climate crisis is so severe and so urgent that this requires a whole of society response. It isn't enough for governments to do their part, although that is critical, but also we need businesses, we need civil society organisations, we need academics. I think every part of society and the economy needs to be involved in this transition. So we're also working with key sectors and businesses to try and accelerate that transition. And we're doing this partly through our engagements such as this. Also, we have some high-level champions who have had roles as business leaders, working with businesses, with private sector, with financial institutions. And also we have Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, is our Prime Minister's Special Envoy on Climate Finance, and he's been doing a huge amount with the financial sector. And so one example of what that has produced is we now have over 250 firms responsible for managing assets worth $88 trillion have joined an alliance to say they will direct their portfolios so that they can achieve net zero by 2050 in the financial sector. And so that movement of finance is going to be really critical in accelerating the move of private investment into the clean, green industries of the future. So these three pillars, negotiations, diplomacy with governments, and real-world action, that is what you're going to see coming out of COP26 in terms of the UK's role. We do have a theme for every day of the conference, and as president, we will be hosting events taking place on that theme each day. And those events are designed to showcase progress and showcase achievements, to share lessons, and allow discussion between countries and organisations that may not normally get the chance to speak to each other, encourage further action, and really give every voice an opportunity to be heard during the conference. So those key days that you might want to look out for, the ones where the UK and Indonesia will be quite prominent in acting together, so for the first 2 days, it is a World Leaders Summit. Our Prime Minister is hosting now, I think, 120 leaders from around the world, heads of state and heads of government. That will be an opportunity for those leaders to speak up about what their country and their government and their nation is doing on climate change. Then the theme days, finance on the 3rd, energy on the 4th, oceans and youth empowerment, that's one I'm particularly excited about, on the 5th, nature on the 6th, and adaptation on the 8th. And don't worry if you didn't note those down, our presidency program is available online. And I'm really excited as well by the plans for the Indonesia Pavilion. Anyone who has been to a COP previously knows that the Indonesia Pavilion is one of the best ones. The diplomacy by food is particularly welcome by everyone attending those conferences. And I've seen they have a really, really exciting plan for their 2 weeks, so I'd encourage you also to take a look at that. And we're delighted that they will also be hosting a mirror pavilion in Jakarta, so that people who aren't able to travel still get an opportunity to feel like they're part of the conference. So that's what I wanted to say. I should say also that although I've picked out some of those theme days, every day of the conference and every issue is important to us. And we have been putting a huge amount of effort into trying to make this conference a success. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Terima kasih Ibu Helen. Kalau boleh saya summarize, tadi Ibu Helen mengatakan bahwa COP26 ini 6 tahun setelah perjanjian Paris, karena harusnya diadakan tahun lalu, tapi karena pandemi kita tunda menjadi tahun 2021. Jadi COP26 ini adalah COP pertama yang akan digunakan untuk negara-negara untuk mengambil tindakan secara nyata. Dan COP26 ini juga COP pertama yang akan meminta negara-negara untuk melaporkan dan mengupdate target penurunan emisi mereka pada 2030. Nah, tadi Ibu Helen juga mengatakan bahwa di COP26 di Glasgow nanti juga akan mendiskusikan apakah target secara keseluruhan dari negara-negara peserta akan bisa memenuhi target untuk menjaga temperatur global di bawah 1,5 derajat Celcius. Dan juga kenapa ini dilakukan secara fisikal, in person, karena isunya ini amat sangat penting dan kami juga memastikan inklusivitas. Jadi agar semua negara ini bisa terwakili, karena kalau kita mengadakannya secara hibrid atau online, itu secara teknis dan logistik agak sedikit sulit karena mereka tersebar di seluruh dunia dan ada perbedaan waktu. Makanya COP26 ini diadakan di Glasgow secara fisikal dan tentunya dengan protokol kesehatan yang sangat ketat. Dan Ibu Helen juga tadi menyebutkan bahwa target utama dari COP26 ini adalah untuk semua negara menuju emisi nol bersih pada 2050 atau lebih cepat. Dan last but not least tadi juga dikatakan ada pavilion Indonesia yang ada di Glasgow juga dan juga ada di Jakarta, di mana pemerintah Indonesia juga menerapkan diplomasi makanan, jadi ada makanan Indonesia di Glasgow, jangan kaget. Buat teman-teman yang nggak pergi ke Glasgow juga bisa mengunjungi pavilion Indonesia di KLHK di Jakarta. Terima kasih Helen, thank you so much, and I would like to invite Ibu Amanda McLaughlin to deliver her presentation on low carbon energy. Silakan, Amanda.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can all hear me okay. Great. Selamat siang, everybody. I'm Amanda McLaughlin, the new Development Director in the British Embassy, and it's a huge honor to be here today to speak to you at this pivotal moment for our planet and for humanity. I'm going to give a short update on energy in relation to COP26, and then very happy to answer any questions later on. As you all know, the energy sector is one of the largest contributors to global emissions. Much of the world's development over the past century, including in the UK, has been powered by fossil fuels. But we know that emissions from the energy sector need to go down, not only to reduce the emissions that are causing climate change, but also to reduce the pollution from burning fossil fuels that has severe health impacts around the world. And we obviously see that day to day in Jakarta. It has been estimated that to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, the global transition to clean power needs to move 4 to 6 times faster than at present. Thankfully, there has never been a better time to transition away from fossil fuels. That's because the alternatives have become cheaper, more efficient, and more widely available than ever before. As renewable energy continues to be deployed at scale, this will only accelerate. Costs used that draw more power from the sun and wind in much more efficient ways. Since 2010, for example, the cost of solar power has fallen by 85%, and the cost of wind power by 49%. Investors are also increasingly turning their attention towards renewable energy opportunities instead of fossil fuels. So we see all of this as a huge opportunity for Indonesia, which has the potential to become a global leader in renewable energy, a climate superpower, providing clean, affordable, and reliable power across the country while creating new industries and job opportunities at the same time. Indonesia has made some real progress in taking advantage of this opportunity over the past year. It already had a target to provide 23% of its energy from renewable sources by 2025. As well as that, the sector will be net zero by 2060, with all coal power retired by 2056. So these are really encouraging steps that have attracted the attention of investors. We've seen some major new investments in renewable energy projects in recent months in Indonesia. There will be many, many more to follow, I am sure. But one challenge facing Indonesia's transition is the current high level of coal power in the system. It will take some very careful planning to reduce this reliance on coal. One of the priorities of COP26 is to consign coal to history. Indonesia, with its commitment to retire coal in the 2050s, has already started this, and we appreciate the ambition that Indonesia has shown in making that commitment. But we think that Indonesia would benefit from bringing this target further forward. This would lower the risk of coal assets becoming stranded and becoming a burden on public finances. It would create space for a faster transition towards cheaper renewables, which would also help to generate jobs faster. Indonesia also still has some coal remaining in its pipeline, which is expected to be built up to 2029. It is likely that some of this pipeline could be stopped, avoiding new long-term contracts for power stations that may not be needed just a few years after they have been built. Indonesia has already cancelled some of its pipeline, and many other countries have taken similar steps. As coal currently provides so much of Indonesia's energy, reducing this can seem like a daunting task. But Indonesia is not alone, and other countries have rapidly reduced their dependence on coal. In the UK, for example, coal provided over 40% of our power as recently as 2012, but now it provides less than 2% and will be completely phased out in just 3 years. So it just shows what is possible. We understand that Indonesia needs support to make this transition. The UK is offering support to Indonesia to do this. Our main tool is the Mentari UK-Indonesia Low Carbon Energy Partnership, which started in early 2020. This partnership between the UK and the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources provides local and international experts to improve policy and regulation, broker investment into renewable energy infrastructure, and ensure that low carbon energy is not just reducing emissions and tackling climate change, but is also creating jobs, investment opportunities, social health and environmental benefits, including for women and marginalized groups. The UK is also working with Indonesia to coordinate the wide range of other international support available for Indonesia's energy transition through the recently established Friends of Indonesia Renewable Energy, or FIRE, dialogues. The FIRE dialogues, which are co-chaired between Indonesia, the UK, Denmark, and Germany, seek to coordinate international support to assist Indonesia in their transition, including developing options to phase out coal power and replace it with renewable energy. FIRE involves international governments, multilateral development banks like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, international institutions such as the International Labour Organization and international energy and renewable energy agencies, and local think tanks, along with several partners in the government of Indonesia, led by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. FIRE provides a single platform for Indonesia to request and access the international support it needs for its low-carbon energy transition. At COP26, we hope to demonstrate international action on energy transition, and for Indonesia to be a huge part of that. We hope that several countries will commit to work together to accelerate their energy transitions, making use of new programs and new funding to be able to do so. We hope that Indonesia will come forward with new announcements at COP26 on its energy transition. For example, its strategy to reach net zero in the energy sector. Doing so would send a strong signal that Indonesia is well on its way to becoming a renewable energy superpower. And after COP26, the support from the UK and our international partners will work with Indonesia to deliver this ambition. We are proud to be in a position to do this, and we are very excited about the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Amanda. So just to quickly summarize what Ibu Amanda has said about energy sector. Sektor energi adalah salah satu kontributor terbesar dalam emisi global, dan banyak negara-negara termasuk Inggris yang energinya juga digerakkan oleh bahan bakar fosil, dan ini tentu saja harus dikurangi dan akhirnya harus dihilangkan demi menciptakan lingkungan yang lebih bersih. Dan tadi Ibu Amanda juga mengatakan bahwa Inggris menyerukan semua negara untuk beralih ke energi bersih, termasuk Indonesia, dan COP26 ini juga bertujuan untuk menyerukan semua negara untuk secara bertahap meninggalkan batu bara. Dan untuk Indonesia memiliki potensi yang cukup besar untuk menjadi pemimpin dunia dalam energi baru terbarukan. Okay, and then last but not least, I would like to invite Bapak Tiago, our senior forestry governance and market advisor, to deliver his presentation. The time is yours, Pak Tiago.
Yes, thank you, Faye. So my name is Tiago. I'm a senior forestry advisor, but I'm here on behalf of a much bigger team of the embassy that is dedicated to forestry and land use. We're about 8 wonderful people. They're very committed and engaged on working with Indonesia on forestry and land use. I'm working based in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Manggala. And so I have been enjoying the adrenaline that it's coming up from Manggala corridors on a lot of the preparation work for COP26 and the work that it's coming next week. Deforestation and biodiversity loss, I don't need to tell you, topical areas of considerable public interest. It is also an area that widely has been considered to be lagging globally. COP26 therefore stands high on ambition for forestry and land use climate action. Now, why are we here in Indonesia and why am I representing the team of forestry and land use? Because Indonesia, as you know, holds the 3rd highest tropical forest cover globally. Indonesia is also considered one of the most species-rich countries on Earth. And around 50% of your beautiful country is covered by forest, and 25% of that is intact primate forest of global importance. UK aid in global terms has helped to identify climate solutions and mobilize finance over the years for tackling the challenges of deforestation and biodiversity loss. I'd like to quote the recent Independent Commission on Aid Impact Review that included Indonesia and for which it was presented in the UK Parliament just last week, where almost 600 million of bilateral aid in global commitments have been deployed in the last 5 years to tackle deforestation and biodiversity. ICAI Review has recognized that the UK has played a significant role in promoting global cooperation in tackling the drivers of deforestation and biodiversity loss. That cooperation would not be possible without Indonesia. And through our programs, over the years, here from Jakarta, but across your archipelago, we have successfully targeted the most relevant drivers of deforestation and biodiversity loss. An additional 1.3 billion in climate-related bilateral programming has been announced for FOLU, specifically for forestry and land use, bilateral partnerships with many countries around the world, but most specifically with Indonesia. Our work on forestry and land use actually celebrates this year 20 years, and it has been our biggest UK overseas development assistance portfolio in Indonesia. So I would like to remind us all that since the historic Bali Declaration in 2001, Indonesia and the UK have established and led the multi-stakeholder forestry partnership that was able to tackle illegal logging. The multi-stakeholder forestry program has 4 phases and has just been extended up to 2023. And we are very excited, and we hope that during COP, we can actually strengthen and renew our partnership in FOLU for another decade with Indonesia. So what would we mean success for us? I would start by saying that COP26 can provide the chance for us to praise and partner with Indonesia, showcasing ambitious forestry and land use targets and goals. I also see an opportunity to build climate momentum on the G7 Leaders Nature Compact, as Ibu Ellen Faulkner was just saying, that sets out to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. It highlights not only nature's role, but also, and I think important for Indonesia, has a commitment to support countries' efforts to more sustainable supply chains. And we welcome here the Indonesian leadership under the COP26 Forest Agricultural Commodity Trade Dialogue, the so-called FACT dialogue. Indonesia, for a fact, has agreed to co-chair with the UK and has been improving together with us the aims of such partnership under the FACT dialogue to find ways of coordinating actions on trade, markets, and promoting sustainable production around the world. Now, to renew our UK partnership on trade and forests is going to be key during COP next week. And building on our 20 years partnership with Indonesia, namely on our domestic pioneer SVLK system, we hope to partner and to showcase leading efforts coming from Indonesia on global legal and responsible trade on more forest commodities. To support Indonesia on their targets in the forestry and land use, as mentioned before, that includes the aim for the sector to become a net carbon sink by 2030, which we consider a highly ambitious but commendable goal. As Ibu Helen was saying, I cannot describe the excitement in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry on the preparations of both the pavilions in Glasgow, which is led by DG PHL, and the pavilion in Jakarta, which is led by the Sekjen himself in the ministry. We hope that these will also be used on the 4th of November as an opportunity to celebrate 20 years of UK-Indonesia collaboration on forestry and land use, and a good way to publicly shine a light on Indonesians' climate priorities in the final days of the COP26 very important negotiations. Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Tiago. Tadi Pak Tiago menjelaskan kerjasama Inggris dan Indonesia dalam sektor kehutanan dan penggunaan lahan. Dan COP26 itu adalah momentum penting bagi kedua negara untuk meningkatkan kerjasama di sektor tersebut. Dan tadi juga disebutkan oleh Pak Tiago tentang pavilion Indonesia. Ini sepertinya populer sekali ya, pavilion Indonesia yang berada di Glasgow dan juga di Jakarta. Dan mudah-mudahan di pavilion Indonesia ini juga akan diadakan sebuah selebrasi atau perayaan 20 tahun kerjasama Inggris dan Indonesia di sektor kehutanan dan juga penggunaan lahan. Okay, baik. That's the end of all of the speeches, ladies and gentlemen, and then we will now open the Q&A session. Who wants to go first? Please state your name and your media, please. Thank you. Ada yang mau bertanya dulu? Silakan, Eno. Ada mikrofon. And then we will replace the cover of the microphone once used, ya. Yeah? Thank you.
Halo Pak Dubes, Mbak maaf ini terhalang sama podium. Halo Pak Dubes, how are you? Apa kabar? And all the speakers. My questions is, each of you maybe who wants to answer, can you explain in a simple terms so that Indonesians can understand how important they to play a role, in supporting emission reductions and including the energy transitions as the UK wants in its presidency on COP26. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you still hear me through the mask? Good. So I think I would say two things to people who are wondering how they can engage with this. I mean, firstly is to recognize its importance, that it matters to all of us. Each individual, each parent, each child, each family are engaged with climate change because it's going to affect all of our futures. But as I said in my speech, I also would say to them that there are things we can all do. There are things that we can do as individuals by being more energy efficient, by making our own transitions to lower carbon emissions in our daily lives, and also by the world as a whole is engaged in that transition. So I think to them I would say it's not a message of despair. There is a huge amount to do and we need to do it quickly, but we know what we have to do and we can all help with it. Thank you.
Helen, do you want to add?
Yeah, just one thing to say that we recently ran a competition with the foreign policy community of Indonesia, asking young people around Indonesia to submit videos of their climate activity and solutions. And I think all of us involved in that competition were really just amazed by how creative young people are here and the amount of activity that's happening in communities all across Indonesia. And obviously that's not just happening with young people, that's happening with people across generations. But I think it's really a sign of that activity doesn't always get a lot of attention, but actually there are solutions coming up all the time. And part of our job, part of your job, is to find those stories and share those solutions so that we can see the progress that's happening and really give more visibility to those actions that are already happening.
Oke, atau ya, silakan.
Thank you very much. My name is Wela from iNews TV. I'm interesting to see how the pandemic has been influenced the polluted rivers all around the world. In Jakarta Bay, we already know that it has been polluted by paracetamol during the pandemic, and also the Tietê River in Brazil, it has been also polluted during the pandemic. The river has been filled with bubbles in Tietê River in Brazil. Also, the rivers has been in red color. I'm interested to know your insights. Does the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow also talking about the polluted rivers during the pandemic, or maybe the other things that has been occurred during this pandemic? It has been almost 2 years. Is there any specific session during COP26 in Glasgow talking about that? And my second question is about the Teluk Bintuni's polluted area, that has been impacted by the activity of British Petroleum Tangguh. So I knew that some representative going to COP26, also representing the suku adat, the local community, also has been invited, indigenous people. Is there any specific talking about that also, about the Papua residents living in the Teluk Bintuni area with the representative from British Petroleum? Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for your questions. On the first question, obviously the conference itself is focused on climate change and carbon emissions rather than on local pollution. But I think your wider point is a very good one, that actually we've seen in the pandemic evidence of how things can change for the worse and for the better as a result of that. Carbon emissions fell, but there were local pollution issues as well.
Boleh dibuka, ya.
Yeah, I think you're right. So thank you for your question. I think obviously the COP26 meeting will focus on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, which isn't the same as local pollution issues. Obviously there is another important COP this year on biodiversity, which will address some of those issues. But I think the pandemic has shown us both how things can change for the better and for the worse as a result. And I think that the impacts of local pollution can often be traced back to high carbon processes. And we talked in our speeches about air pollution and water pollution. So I think that an effort to address greenhouse gas emissions can also have side benefits in other areas. On the question about BP, obviously we do not speak for BP. It's a private company, and its engagements in Indonesia are a matter between it and the government of Indonesia. I know that there are ongoing conversations there between the company and the government. It's not for the British government to interfere in Indonesia on those issues. I know there are a range of side events at COP. I'm not aware whether there is a specific one focusing on that. Helen may know more. I think that's all. Thank you.
Silakan, Mbak.
Hello, my name is Nuka from Voice of Indonesia. I have a lot of questions for each of you. So this is gonna be $1 million questions actually. Can COP26 be the solution to solve the climate change in the world? That's first. Second, will the Paris Rulebook, Article 6, could be finalized in COP26? And what kind of contribution that UK provide for this? To Amanda, what is the target of cooperation between UK and Indonesia in renewable energy sector these days? And did UK also contributing in developing electric vehicle in Indonesia? And for Tiago, how many % that Indonesia will lose its forest and biodiversity when Indonesia move its capital city to East Kalimantan, in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you, Nuka. You've come all prepared.
Lots of questions. We'll have to leave space for other people. Oh, fine. Thank you. You described the question to me as the $1 million question. I think it's the billion, trillion, $10 trillion question, to be honest. And I think the answer is it has to be. We don't have another moment. We need to do this together. We need to do this in the context of the United Nations so that every country comes together to solve what is the biggest challenge we face. And I do think that Glasgow COP26 is our last best chance to address the challenge of climate change. And we can. The vision that has been shown by Indonesia and other countries show that the world is committed to making this change. So I think the answer is yes, it is the moment when we need to come together and do this, partly because we don't have an alternative, but partly because on the positive side, we can and we are already showing the will to do it. I'll leave the difficult questions to others.
Thank you. I also wanted to offer something on the $100 million question, to which can COP26 be a success? Well, I really hope so, because that's what I've spent the last 2 years doing. So, you know, I've worked in climate change for a long time, and it can feel like change is too slow, and it is too slow. But at the same time, I think we've come a huge, huge, huge distance, even since Paris. And I do think COP26 is a moment, but it's not the only moment, because a lot of there's a way of accelerating that change. But that progress is happening anyway, and I think that's partly because of the UN process, but it's also partly because this is the way the world is moving. And we need to try and make that change happen much, much faster. But it's happening already, and I don't think that change I don't think that's going to stop or reverse, because I think that change is inevitable now. On your question on the Paris Rulebook and Article 6, yes, so as we've said, we are very much focused on achieving a negotiated outcome. Article 6 is probably the most challenging part of that. We have seen some progress in negotiations over this year, but we're certainly not there yet. And I think that's why our COP president designate has tasked 2 ministers, and I do know who they are if I look them up. I think one of them is from Singapore, to try and take this forward. So those 2 ministers will be working in the margins of COP26 outside the sort of formal negotiations to really try and get to a place where we have an outcome that everyone is happy with. In terms of the UK position as presidency, our responsibility is to be the honest broker. It's to be objective and make sure all parties have their voices heard, and try and move that process so that we can reach an agreement on Article 6 by the end of COP26, but it's definitely one of the priorities for us in the negotiations. Thank you.
Thanks for the question on renewables. So in terms of UK's ambition on supporting Indonesia on renewables, the sky's the limit, really, in terms of what we're hoping to achieve together. We want to deploy everything that we have in our toolbox in the UK toolkit to try and support growth in renewables and help Indonesia realize the incredible potential that is out there. Whether that's development programming, development finance, but also business-to-business engagements, bringing UK expertise and technical assistance to help provide advice to access new technologies, and everything else that we have available. So the sky is the limit. There is no limit to our ambition there. On your specific question on electric vehicles, yep, that's definitely going to need to be in the mix. And one solution, there'll be many others. And I'm sure that as part of our development programming, especially in Bandung, some of the cities where we're working, electric vehicles will need to be part of the solution.
On your question on the future Ibu Kota, so I think it goes to the heart of the forest and land use, right? And as you know better than I do, the political ability to make political choices on land use in Indonesia requires risk, basically, and the fact that the choices and investment that are being done to choose the capital very close to Borneo, which is a landscape of global importance, obviously carries risks. The thing that I can say is that I see from the government of Indonesia a significant amount of progressive reforms to reduce that risk. And from my experience, as you were asking, I think the fact that political ability has been successful in the past when there was multi-stakeholder approaches and consultations. I would hope that would be the way that the government of Indonesia will choose to reduce the risk by making what I think it seems to be an inspirational choice of making it a green capital. And in that sense, I would say that political ability of the government of Indonesia, already demonstrated in the past, should be about the coordination between Bappenas and Kalahaka and other key ministries. Yeah. That I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way, the less as possible. That would be our dream, right? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pak Tiago.
If I can just add, I wanted to have an overarching comment really on the forestry and energy side, because I think across both, we've been really impressed by the government of Indonesia's commitment to high ambition, to reducing deforestation as they've done so successfully over recent years, and to accelerate renewable energy. And I think what I would say is that, as Amanda said, we are very committed to doing as much as we can, but in the end, it's in support of Indonesia's own priorities, and it's those which we're keen to support. And I think, as Ibu Helen said, we've seen so much progress over the last few years that we're really optimistic, I think, about the leadership role that Indonesia is already taking. Thank you.
Ada pertanyaan lagi selanjutnya? Oke, dari belakang. Wah, banyak ya. 2 questions. Oke, silakan.
Selamat pagi, saya Helena. I'm Helena from BBC Media Action. I have 3 questions, Pak. This is a £1 question, so it's not $1 million question. As we know, the Indonesian government already pledged and already stated that that Indonesia will reach the zero net greenhouse emission by 2060. What do you think that would contribute to the global ambition to reduce the global zero net emission? And what sort of bilateral cooperation that you think? Helen mentioned a couple of times about if it's possible to reach that by 2050 or less rather than more than that years, because that would be mentioned. We will probably increase to maybe 3 degrees increase of the temperature, the global temperature. So what sort of bilateral agreement that you think would enhance and accelerate that ambition? And then the second is about the you mentioned about, I haven't heard about follow, but I heard that there's a follow plan that you're going to talk about. Is it part that your discussion in the COP26? And who will benefit from that? Who do you think you're going to focusing on? Whether that's on the bilateral governments networking discussion, or it's also on the public in general, or civil society, which one that you're going to focusing on? And the third is about, now I heard in that discussion currently, that being discussed, the focusing are on the renewable energy and the follow, but haven't mentioned about the follow yet. But that is, with the current situations, we are in the COVID, and there is a new emerging infectious disease. Would that be something that you're going to discuss also in COP26? At least touch base about that, because I think that's also something that will impact to the global climate change in the future. So is that something that you consider to talk also, or what? I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helena. That was 4 questions. Silakan, Pak.
Right, I will try, and then my colleagues will correct me. So on the first question, what will Indonesia's net zero target contribute globally? I don't have the figures to hand, but we know that Indonesia is one of the critical countries in the world. And that's not just because it's one of the biggest countries, it's the 4th most populous country in the world, a high user of energy, one of the most important countries for forests, but also because I think it is a political leader, that I think a lot of countries look to Indonesia for leadership in these areas. It's such a well-respected country that I think what it does is important globally, which is why we are so keen to collaborate with Indonesia on these issues. On the second question on what sort of bilateral agreement and cooperation we envisage, I mean, the first thing I would say on that is we're very much in the hands of the government of Indonesia on these questions. We are delighted that the government is setting out ambitious plans in forestry and land use, in renewable energy, and in other areas, and we're keen to support their priorities. So whatever we do, it's not up to us, it's up to Indonesia, and it's in support of the ambition which Indonesia has. We're really proud of the collaboration that we've had on forestry, as Pak Tiago said, over the last 20 years on forestry, more recently a really vibrant collaboration on renewable energy. And I think it's been a success because it's been a partnership, and that's what we envisage for the future. I am going to try a couple of the others. Just on follow briefly, I mean, Tiago may want to say more, but I think the important thing here is that we're very aware of the importance of forests and other land use for the people who rely on them. That this is, these are areas where people get their livelihoods, where people live, where millions of people have their daily existence, and it must, any solutions, any collaboration must work for them. I'm not sure I quite caught your question on infectious disease, but certainly we see links between health and climate, both the way that climate impact can affect health infrastructure, but also the way that temperature rise, changes in water patterns and other things can raise health risks. And we are very aware of that. There are initiatives going on in a number of areas, certainly including in the G7, I think in the G20 as well, to tackle those. Helen may want to talk about the COP angles to that. Thank you.
Thanks. So just on in net zero, I think Pak Dubes has answered on the kind of contribution to global progress. On your question on bilateral cooperation and agreement, I think it's really important to recognize that, that achieving these targets, both the 2030 targets and the net zero target, whenever that happens, is going to require significant amounts of investment, and that investment is going to come from the private sector, where investors are already looking for these kind of projects. Investors want to put their money into renewable energy, into zero emissions vehicles, because they can see that's the way the world is moving. And they recognize that, the people who move first on these things are likely to have an advantage. So I think that's already happening, but what whatever support partnership we have with Indonesia, as Pak Dubes says, supporting Indonesia's own priorities, has to also focus on how does Indonesia bring more of that investment in, and what are the barriers to that investment now, and how do we work with Indonesia to remove those barriers so that that investment starts flowing here, as it already is in other places, so that Indonesia really benefits from that private sector investment in all aspects of the transition. On infectious diseases, it's not something that has come up in COP, and those of you who've been around COP know it's quite challenging to add new items to the agenda, because COP has quite a strict mandate, and it's important to keep that mandate as it is. I think just in terms of health systems, the World Health Organization has been working with the COP26 presidency and other international organizations and countries on projects to try and make health systems both more resilient to changes in climate and also more low carbon. So things like the UK ran a project a few years ago to put solar panels, a reliable energy source, which means they can refrigerate medicines and vaccines. So I think there were two aspects to that. Making the health system more resilient so that when pandemics happen or when the impacts of climate change happen, those health systems are prepared for that and are ready for the shock. And also, how do we bring health systems into the transition fully? Thanks.
Just on the recent announcement on the NetSync Follow 2030. I think to be very honest with you, I think the excitement from stakeholders when this announcement was taking place means that I think there will be a broader range of beneficiaries when it comes to the implementation and the roadmap of such commitment from the Indonesian government. Let's not forget that land use has been one of the major drivers of deforestation, and large-scale plantations have been responsible for 23%, while smallholder land conversion 22%. Just to give you some official figures. The reforms that are at stake are obviously new ones, so I'm not able to comment on those, but I know that this is going to profile heavily in both pavilions, in Glasgow and in Mangala, so I strongly advise you to attend the respective sessions and talk shows around the NetSync Follow 2030 commitment. But what we can see is that the reforms that are planned to be in place may actually have the potential to increase the value of forests, and for the first time probably in starting treating carbon as a commodity in itself, which would be pioneer, because then you would be including the private sector in terms of reducing emissions and helping the government of Indonesia with our NDCs.
Thank you, Pak Tiago. And before we go back to you to the floor, sebentar Akil ya. Ada satu pertanyaan. There's one question coming from our media colleagues joining us through Zoom, from Abdul Manan from Tempo magazine. The question is, he's asking about the mechanism on international funding in emission reduction.
I think that's one for me.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, I mean, we've mentioned a couple of times the 100 billion commitment. So that was a commitment for developed countries to mobilize $100 billion per year to support climate activity from a range of sources by 2020. And so there are two things that will happen at COP26. The first is a review of how close we are to reaching that commitment. And we know from recent reporting that commitment was not met or is unlikely to be met for 2020. We don't have the exact figures yet. But we think it will be met by 2023. And again, COP President Designate has tasked ministers from Germany and Canada to produce a delivery plan to demonstrate exactly how that commitment will be reached. This is a really totemic issue in the negotiations, and there will be a lot of disappointment that the target hasn't been reached. Obviously, the pandemic will have been a factor in that, and we recognise that this is also an issue of trust between parties. And so, as presidency, we have been working really hard this year to encourage other countries to increase their climate finance commitment. I think Dubas mentioned already, the UK doubled our climate finance commitment to £11.6 billion from 2021 to 2025, and we've been working really hard to try and encourage others to do the same. So I think we will be in a position to say that over the course of 2020 to 2025, we will achieve 100 billion per year on average. We will just be achieving it later. And that's, that is an issue that we recognise, but we are doing everything we can as presidency to try and demonstrate the progress that is being made and to really accelerate the progress towards hitting that target.
Thank you, Helen. And then Akil from Jakarta Post. Yeah.
Hello, I want to ask about, so with only days ahead, Indonesian officials says that they have also prepared for COP, especially with about the Article 6 by preparing the carbon trading presidential regulations, and our new harmonized tax law already introduced carbon tax in Indonesia. So what do you think of these recent developments from Indonesia? Does that mean it will help with the Article 6 and the UK itself as host? What would you provide during COP26 to push for the finalizing of the Paris rulebook? And then second question again about the 100 billion pledge. If the OECD said that it would not be met, but will be met at 2023, does that mean that COP26 should provide new target for climate financing by developed countries to developing countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll leave the difficult bits of Article 6 to Helen. On your first point, we very much welcome what Indonesia has been doing on carbon markets, the presidential regulation, and the planned introduction of a carbon tax. And I think that is, from our experience, we know that introducing a carbon price can really drive emissions reductions, and it's quite a cost-efficient way. It's quite a positive way of doing that, and it addresses the externality which we want to deal with. So we're very pleased that Indonesia is working in that direction. What that will mean for the Indonesian position at COP, which I think was part of your question, is very much a question for the Indonesian government, not to us. But we do understand the importance of Article 6 in this context, and the importance of completing the Paris rulebook. And I will hand off that difficult question to Helen. Thank you.
The difficult question being the 100 billion question.
Just on the 100 billion, I think as Helen said earlier, the important thing is to deliver what we've promised. And we know that's a matter of we know that it needs to be done. So our focus as president has been on making sure that happens and making sure there is a concrete plan for delivering that. And that's what Helen was talking about earlier. I'd highlight in that context that it's right to focus on the 100 billion. It's right that we're held to that. But most of the money which drives the low carbon transition is going to be coming from the private sector. And I think that the focus on investment, the focus on developing new industries is exactly the right one. We know that there are literally trillions of dollars wanting to go into the clean sector. And I think ensuring that we have the right environment globally to attract that money will be at least as important as the public sector finance. As I say, that's not to downplay the importance of the 100 billion at all. We are very committed to making sure that delivers, and we're very committed to ensuring it's achieved. But it's not the only, it's not the only game in town. Thanks. So over to you on Article 6.
Would you mind just repeating your question on Article 6?
Can we have the microphone back, please? Sorry. Oh, sebentar, Akil. Mikrofonnya.
So what I want to ask with that, with Indonesia making preparation for carbon tax, does that mean Indonesia will have the best position to push to complete the Paris rulebook, and as the COP26 presidency, what you can also prepare to make sure that Article 6 finish?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think we see the recent passing of carbon tax as part of the harmonized tax law as a really positive step. We've seen from other examples that a carbon tax can be really effective in driving change and incentivizing investment in different ways. And I think the presidential regulation on carbon pricing, when that comes out, will also be a really positive step in that direction. And I think we've talked a lot about Indonesia's potential as a climate superpower, and I think having these kind of measures which will drive change in the whole economy are a really important example of that leadership. In terms of what that means for Article 6, I mean, we've been talking about Article 6 in COP now for, 6 years, and it remains an incredibly tricky article to finalize. And that's because everyone has a stake in it. So every country stands to benefit from Article 6 in some way, but that all depends on how the final decision comes out. I think from our perspective, as I said before, as presidency, our responsibility and our duty is to reach a negotiated outcome, which means we're not pushing for any particular outcome. We need to make sure that the parties that have a really strong view and a strong stake in Article 6 feel that their voices are being heard, and that the decision that comes out from there is a decision that meets those desires and aspirations, but also that it is a decision that meets what the Paris Agreement set up that article to do, which is to be a way of driving emissions reductions. So part of our responsibility as presidency is to make sure that that decision delivers on that aspiration, that the international carbon market, in whatever form it comes out, is something that drives real emissions reductions. And so there are some aspects that we will be looking at very carefully, avoiding double counting, what we do about carryover credits. These are familiar topics to anyone who's been around Article 6. But trying to do those two things, making sure that the decision delivers on the intent of the Paris Agreement for Article 6, that it makes a significant contribution to global emissions reductions, and that it works for parties that have a particular stake in it. I think those two things is going to remain challenging. And that's why we've been, we haven't waited for COP26. We have been negotiating on this during the formal negotiations that have been happening this year. And as I said, we've now tasked 2 ministers to lead informal negotiations with the parties that have particularly strong views, to try and find where are those areas of common interest and where can we find a kind of acceptable landing ground, so that hopefully by the time the negotiations happen at COP26, we've already got a really clear idea of what are the remaining sticking points and how do we try to get through those.
Thank you, Helen. And I think we're just running out of time now. Pak Warif Basori would like to pose any question, Pak? Silakan.
Terima kasih. I have 4 short questions to each of the panelists. Ambassador Owen, in your remarks, you stated the importance of institutions. Now, going back to the Ambassadors Roundtable, 11th October, you gave a similar statement that there has to be, for all of us to achieve not going beyond the 1.5 Celsius threshold, you stated that there must be a collaboration of institutions to make that possible. My question is, could you identify 2 or 3 institutions where collaboration can be achieved? 1 in financing and 2 in technology transfer. My question to Ibu Helen, again on Article 6. Now we know that the Katowice conference, in making the rule book, it was incomplete. And my question is, what is the unfinished business in Article 6? What country party interests are involved? And what options are raised for a settlement? For Ibu Amanda on the carbon market. What is the connection of this unfinished business in Article 6 with a carbon market? What carbon market mechanisms are there? And please explain technical terms in Article 6, like IMCO. What does that mean? And for Bapak Tiago, on peatlands and mangroves, you know that these are 2 ecosystems that hold a great deal of carbon dioxide. And 1 hectare of mangrove can contain as much as 5 times 1 hectare of upland forests. My question is, could you identify natural ecosystems that hold great amounts of carbon that are under-researched and even under-managed? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Papa. Questions for a whole seminar, I think. Thank you for recalling my statements at the Ambassadors Roundtable, which I thought was a terrific event, actually, and really brought together a lot of different voices. In terms of which institutions we're talking about, first of all, of course, the United Nations, that we are here to talk about COP26, about the gathering of 197 countries who have signed the UN Framework Convention. And I think COP26 is one of the institutions where countries need to come together to agree on finance and agree on technology transfer. But you're quite right, it's not the only one. In that context, I'd highlight the announcements which came out of the G7 summit at Carbis Bay in the UK earlier this year, where the richest countries in the world committed to increasing their climate finance. And I'd highlight the G20 as a critical grouping, which of course Indonesia will be chairing from this weekend, as the place where the biggest economies in the world come together to talk about how we finance the climate transition. And I think on technology transfer, there are a range of places where this will happen. But first and foremost, I think it will happen in the private sector. The technology transfer, I think, is not a mechanistic issue where technology is handed across. It's a collaboration. It's something which is invested in all countries, and I think the transfers happen when people see an interactive environment to make those investments. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as Bapak Dubes has said, we could do a whole seminar on Article 6 and carbon markets. I mean, without going into huge amounts of technical detail on this, I think, as anyone who's been close to COP knows, nothing is decided until everything is decided. So in terms of the unfinished business, we know some of the key sticking points so far, and I've mentioned those already. How do we avoid double counting? What do we do about credits pre-2020? How do we make Article 6 generate finance for adaptation, not just for mitigation? Those are three of the sticking points. They may well have changed completely by the time COP26 starts, because if an article is open, then everything is on the table. And a change in one section will require changes in all sections. In terms of country party interests, we know Indonesia has a particular interest in this. From the number of questions, I think if Article 6 succeeds in creating, then every country has an interest in being part of that. So I don't think there are specific countries that I'd want to highlight, because ultimately, if this works, it works for everybody. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work for anybody. I think that also goes for your question on linking into carbon markets here. We know that in various regions and countries, different authorities have set up carbon markets already. Very few of those interact with each other yet, and they all have slightly different ways of setting prices and of working. As the UK, we just set up our emissions trading scheme in January this year. That will not be the same as the emissions trading scheme in California or in China. So one of the purposes of Article 6 is how do we bring together these differently designed and different features of carbon markets and trading around the world, and be able to integrate those into a system that allows for cross-border trading, because eventually that's the purpose. So I think that's, I don't know, Amanda, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks. Just to support Helen's comments there. We're obviously extremely supportive of Indonesia's plans and thinking around carbon markets, carbon taxes, etc. But these are very much sovereign decisions for Indonesia to take about how they want to manage and plan these measures. We are extremely supportive. We've been sharing our own experiences of how we've run carbon taxing and involved ourselves in emissions trading schemes, and how that's worked for us to help inform Indonesia's own planning and thinking around this. But I think the way that it is done will need to be extremely context specific, and those are decisions that we can only stand back and support and provide advice and guidance, but it's very much for Indonesia to decide how it wants to play this.
Yes, on peat and mangrove.
Ya, terkait dengan lahan gambut dan mangrove, kita tentunya akan sangat bergantung pada kepemimpinan politis Indonesia terkait dengan carbon taxing.
We would be able to see maybe a new political framework, regulatory framework that would be able to increase the value or put the right value to ecosystem services and especially ecological systems that would, in a way, go beyond boundaries. And I think if you ask me for a solution, I think there's a lot of experience in this country with jurisdictional approaches, where you would be able to maybe look at those hydrological systems which are of global importance, knowing that Indonesia has the largest tropical peat in the world, and unique and the deepest peat domes in the world as well, together with mangroves systems that are vital not only in terms of carbon sink and carbon storage, but also for coastal protection, which is vital for a country like Indonesia, which is sitting on the ring of fire. for natural disasters. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions in terms of innovative ways of looking at how to protect, rehabilitate, invest into those hydrological systems. I think we're talking about the balance between public goods and private goods. And I for one, I'm very curious about what's going to be discussed next week during COP in the Indonesian pavilion, to see how that is reflected in the Net Follow Think 2030.
Thank you, Batiago. I think that wraps up our media briefing for COP26 today. We're pretty much 10 minutes over time now, but thank you so much for coming. We will be sending out the copy of Pak Dubes' speech in both English and Bahasa Indonesia via WhatsApp. So thank you very much, everybody, and then we look forward to seeing your reporting, your proactive reporting on climate change and COP26. Thank you so much. Salam sehat selalu, semoga semua Pak Dubes, Ibu Amanda, Ibu Helen. Yeah. So there will be a quick doorstep with Pak Dubes, so please maintain your distance ya. Kamera bisa disiapkan? Okay. Maintain your distance ya. Safe distance please. Ya. Safe distance ya. Jangan deket-deket ya.
I'll try with the mask. Mask on or off?
Agak sedikit menjauh ya teman-teman.
Yeah.
Jaga jarak.
No, I don't. It's not enough meters. I don't think. So,
Let's be honest. Who doesn't love the ocean?
Good day to you, and I'm truly sorry that I can't be with you in person. There is one subject which is going to affect every single one of us, and that is, of course, climate change. I grew up in Britain. As a boy, I yearned to see the glories of the tropical world, the mysteries of the rainforest, the jungle, the unbelievable beauties of a coral reef, nature at its most complex and glorious. And nowhere are these beauties and wonders more evident than here in Southeast Asia. The Coral Triangle, the global center of marine diversity, and the rainforest, which is the oldest in the world, dating back to 70 million years. And when I got here, I was not disappointed. I came here nearly 70 years ago, and these wonderlands were exactly like that. But since that time, they've changed. They have been dreadfully damaged, and I have seen it happening. Borneo has lost its rainforest at a faster rate than anywhere else in the world. 30% of it has gone within the last 40 years. Thailand and Vietnam, over a similar period, have lost half their mangroves, and in consequence their coasts and the cities built on them are losing their protection against tidal waves and storms. But the natural world is a source of more than just beauty. It provides us with every mouthful of food we eat and every lungful of air we breathe. Our health and our survival is dependent upon it, and yet we continue to destroy it. That is sheer folly. But these losses are not irreversible, not yet. Nature can recover if given the chance. Mangroves can be replanted. The rainforest can spread back into areas where it once flourished. Coral reefs will regrow if allowed to do so, and with a speed that will astonish anyone who's not familiar with the underwater world. And cities themselves, the home for so many of us, can welcome back wildlife and help it flourish, as Singapore, the city of nature, is now demonstrating so dramatically. Rainforests can still help to regulate world temperatures. Urban green spaces can help cool our cities and reduce the risk of floods. ASEAN has played a central role in this recovery and must surely continue to do so with even greater determination and vigour. It's within your power to do even better. Humanity working together could, even now, stabilise the global rise in temperature to below 2 degrees, and so avert a major worldwide catastrophe. I'm truly delighted that the UK, as President of COP26 in partnership with Italy, is calling for urgent action to put the protection of nature and diversity at the very centre of climate policies. As we come out of COVID-19 pandemic, we must surely strengthen these efforts and build back and build greener. All of us, no matter who we are, have the responsibility to care for the planet. The future of all humanity now depends on us. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you every success.
Let's be honest, who doesn't love the ocean? The many beautiful biomes it has, the oxygen it produces, the natural resources it provides, I could go on and on. But did you know that our ocean is being threatened by something called marine debris? Marine debris is all kinds of litter coming from land, bodies of water, or coast that end up in oceans, making marine debris one of the most widespread pollution problems faced by the world's oceans and waterways. What damages could it cause? It could have several impacts that could affect wildlife and also us, humans. It could damage carboning ecosystems such as mangroves, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. It could also cause economic loss among communities due to vessel damage and decreasing recreational value in tourism. Today, there is no place on Earth immune to this problem, including Indonesia. Each year, 1.29 million tons of plastic get washed away and enter our waters. The Indonesian government has set a national action plan to reduce marine debris by 70% between 2018 to 2025, with a further ambition to achieve near zero waste in Indonesia by 2040. In order to achieve this goal, I'm going to ask you to join me in tackling the marine debris problem together. You've probably heard of the term reduce, reuse, and recycle. Out of these three, the simplest thing for us to do is to reduce and reuse. Plus, waste minimization is more important so that we can prevent more waste from entering our ocean. Beforehand, I'm going to categorize marine debris based on its constituent material. First, plastic. Plastic has become a staple item in our society for its diverse functions, from plant pots, stationery, kitchenware, to the single-use items that we most frequently use, plastic bottles and bags. Each minute, there are 1 million plastic bottles and 2 million plastic bags used around the world, and most of them end up in landfills or the ocean. Plastic takes hundreds of years to decompose, and it just breaks down into smaller pieces in the ocean. It could be mistaken as food by wildlife, and thus become ingested and move up on the food web until it eventually ends up on our plates. The solution? Bring your own bags and bottles everywhere. When you go shopping, buy food, or just bike around, it's best to be prepared and bring your own stuffs. Another solution would be shopping from a bulk store. The second material is paper or cardboard. With the rising era of online shopping, the amount of cardboard used to wrap our goods increase. When we receive one, save it for future use or use it as handicraft. And last is fabrics that's made up of tiny strands of plastic like this one. When you wash a synthetic piece of clothing, the microfibers fall out and flow to a nearby marine habitat. The most effective solution is buying fewer synthetic clothes like fast fashion. Instead, invest on clothes that are sustainable or buy from thrift shops. Marine debris is a complex and ever-growing problem, and it's up to everyone to play a role in the solution. Start from yourself by changing your processes little by little until it becomes the way you do things. It may seem like a trivially small thing, but it is part of a larger cultural shift into a cleaner Indonesian Ocean by 2025. So, are you in?
There are many forms of action, whether big or small, that we can do in order to make our Earth a greener and a better place. Surprisingly, fashion is the second most polluting industry in the world. Well, does it sound like a news? According to the data published by the United Nations Environment Programme and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, every year the fashion industry uses 93 billion cubic meters of water, which is enough to meet the consumption needs of 5 million people. Not only that, around 20% of wastewater worldwide comes from fabric dyeing and treatment. The fashion industry is also responsible for 10% of annual global carbon emissions, which is more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. In addition to that, every year 500,000 tons of plastic microfibers are dumped into the ocean, the equivalent of 50 billion plastic bottles which cannot be extracted from the water and they can spread throughout the food chain. As one of the most populous countries in the world, Indonesia inevitably has been contributing to the catastrophes, especially due to the significant shift of Indonesian people lifestyle over the decades. Fashion sustainability is no longer about fashionista, because we're all aware that fashion is our basic needs. Everyone needs fashion. So, what does sustainable fashion mean? Well, it is a movement of fostering change to fashion products and the fashion system towards greater ecological integrity and social justice. Sustainable fashion not only addresses fashion textiles or products, but also the whole system or supply chain of how clothing is produced, who produced it, and how long the lifespan of a product is. Now, how do we as consumers can help address the global impacts of fashion waste? Actually, there are many ways to address them, such as reduce, reuse, and recycle. And here are several tips that you can follow. Tips number 1, invest in clothing that you will wear for a long time. Tips number 2, buy for quality, not quantity. Tips number 3, be knowledgeable about sustainable materials, check the tag and read the product information before you buy. Tips number 4, donate your unwanted clothes. And last but not least, resell your pre-loved items. In conclusion, sustainability is a group effort among the governments, businesses or brands, and consumers. However, it is also important to remember that consumers hold the control over the brands, as their demands will be translated into new products or designs. Therefore, their actions are vital to this movement. If consumers fully understand the importance of fashion sustainability, it will be much easier to achieve net zero emissions and to save our planet. Certainly, it will not be easy to make a difference, but it is also possible to do through continuous efforts to make our world a greener and a better place.